Well, hello everyone. My name is Chris Nelson. Welcome to the Know Your Online Audience presented by Resi and Gloo. I'm joined today with my friend Rick Miner and Nate Anderson with the Resi team. And, in so many of these discussions, we start off with the disruption or dysfunction in many cases of 2021. And today we want to share, I think of, Romans 8:28 around God being able to use all things for good. And that's what's been happening in many cases here this year with the teams at Resi and Glue. And we wanted to share some of that with you of how God's using technology to reach people, to impact communities, and to have pastors and church leaders be able to have access to tools that make their lives easier. And we're going to zoom in today to the topic around knowing your online audience. And before we do that, just wanted to introduce Rick and Nate from the Resi team. Jump in there and say what's up, fellas.
Yeah, hey guys, good to see everyone out here today. We're super excited to go through the content that we have in store today and super excited for this partnership with Glue. And I serve as the VP of sales here at Resi, so super excited to just see as we expand and widen our reach here with these great tools.
Yeah, same. Thank you guys. Really appreciate taking the
And Nate, I
time.
think
And
you're on mute, buddy.
oh,
I always always somebody does that. Last time it was me.
yeah, it was actually just for you guys too, so everybody else could hear me. But we're in our new studio, so it's actually pretty fun today. You can see our fancy new Resi set behind us. But thankful for y'all joining us today, and this is a great topic, and couldn't have asked for a better partner to go through it. Obviously, we get a lot of questions all the time about, hey, we're online. How do we do this better? Everybody's online right now, and how do we understand our audience, and how do we understand how to reach them better? So, yeah, really excited about today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Nate. And so today, guys, we have a really special guest speaker. Actually, joins us from Glue. He's been a part of Leadership Network. He pastored at Mission Church in Arizona for many years. Matt Engel, and he'll be going through several different topics today that have to do with the jobs of the church. So when we think about attract, get, keep, grow, multiply. Attract, get, keep, grow, multiply. Um, we're super excited to see as he goes through that and talking through a lot of the different ways that your online engagement or online strategy can have a role in this in your online stream. So I'll go ahead and we'll go off to the next topic and kind of just read through, just so you guys know. Most of you took a survey today, or a survey prior to this webinar, and we did this survey just to help us understand where are people at today when it comes to their online engagement. So as we segue to that and start to talk through that a little bit, Matt will help us better understand what that looks like. So as we look at these results, we're going to share some of the results from that survey today. And I will go ahead and read off kind of the first one and just introduce Matt Engel here. Matt, if you want to just share a few, I'll read the first question with you here in just a second.
Yeah, good to be with you guys. Thanks for joining us and just kind of hearing some of the learnings that we're seeing, across the landscape of ministry. And to Chris's point early on, we're not here to really rehash 2020, but thank the Lord for the opportunity for us to innovate. And so can we acknowledge the learnings that are happening and share that with you guys? And I like to say there's a lot of dumb tax that's been paid. Let's make sure you guys have a little bit more knowledge on what's been paid, so that we can advance the kingdom together. So super excited to be here. I love the Resi team. Thankful for our partnership with Brushfire and being able to put this on with us. So yeah, let's get going, and we'll dive into everything.
Awesome. Yeah, and also on that, huge shout out to Brushfire. They're actually hosting this for us today. Thanks for acknowledging that, Matt. And so, yeah, we'll go ahead and dive into this. This will be just kind of a round robin kind of question and answer deal. Feel free to, like Nate said in the chat, feel free to ask any questions you guys have as we go along here. So yeah, as we take a look at this first survey result, in the midst of the current pandemic, what was your church's preference for attending church worship services? And as we look at this, we see a pretty even mix of like a hybrid model, preferred to watch online at 32%, online live at 32%, and in person obviously is the goal. We're at 29% that we're pretty far away from today, right? I mean I think in the past we'd like to see that be a much higher, and today due to COVID and the things that have happened in 2020, that's shifted a little bit. So Matt, when you look at this, would just love to hear your perspective on what that means, or like what you get from this in
Yeah.
looking at the data.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty consistent with what I've seen across the board. I've seen some churches with in-person gathering upwards of like 50 to 60% in certain pockets, but it's so geographic right now, and with the various restrictions that are down to like even a city level, that's probably the consistency. The thing that I see in all of this, though, is when you roll up everybody's online experience, it's actually like 70% of people are consuming content online, and that begins to sort of reconcile, at least in my head, what would it look like for the church to pastor differently. So thanks to COVID, and again, I'm not advocating for the deaths and all the turmoil and all that stuff, but thanks to COVID, it gave the church the opportunity to truly pastor people where they were at. People, the largest front door to the church has always been the quote unquote screen door. I like to say the website, the screen door. We just never really pastored to that. It was always come to the four walls of the building and we'll pastor you. And now within this new motion, we've got a lot of different variety of ways in which what I like to call modalities to actually pastor our people. So 70% of the respondents are saying, hey, we have some sort of online capability that is being leveraged by our people. Now, the functional question is, do we want to lean into that? Or do we want to try to force compliance that says, no, in order for you to be pastor, you got to show up? So that's a unique element from my perspective. And we've seen the uniqueness of the modalities. I mean, the various ways that churches are now beginning to apply a unique experience to online versus what we used to do in church was we live streamed our in-person experience and said, hey, we're just going to treat everybody as if they're here in the building. And it's like, that really, I mean, that really was never the preferred motion, but we could get away with it. Now with this new era, this next season that we're going to be in, like digital's not going away. It's ramping up actually even more. And a lot of the research shows, like, from Barna, you've got a third of your people that probably stayed only streaming you. You've got a third of your people that are streaming other people, including you. So they're sort of consuming a variety of different things. And you got a third that probably never really came back. And so from that perspective, I think we have to really acknowledge modality is adjusting, and how do we bring the gospel and the experiences in both modalities, both analog, physically present, and digital from the screen door perspective.
Hey, Matt, as a dad of two toddlers, personally, my preference is to be in church and to have them in church and Sunday school. But our church opened up. We had to reserve a seat, and we came back. But we brought the toddlers with us, right?
Yep.
And we only did that a handful of times because of the impact. Like, you only get so many goldfish and coloring before they're wandering the halls and creating a scene. And so our preference was to always be in church and to have them go to theirs, but it was so much easier. Think about good, like we were already traveling or not in church all 4 weeks of the month, and to be able to watch at home or in the comfort of our own time with our kids, maybe when they went to sleep, that has helped our young family in being able to engage with the church in those times where before we would have just missed.
That's right. I mean, there's a large church on the East Coast in Pennsylvania that went to sort of an on-demand type motion when COVID hit, and they just kind of made the decision, hey, let's test something, let's try something a little bit different. And they found that they were actually reaching people at 11 p.m. Eastern time, was only 9 o'clock or I'm sorry, it was 8 o'clock Pacific time. And what they found is they were getting on average about 100 to 125 people showing up, pulling that service down during that specific time slot. And they were like, hey, we would have missed those people, or we would have forced them to be on our time zone. We had no reconciliation of who actually was coming through our screen doors. And now this has given us a new, like, invigorated motion that's like, man, we can pastor people all the way over in California who we had no clue is that they were actually connected to our church prior to, the pandemic. So there are intrinsic benefits that have emerged from this that I think actually have led to the church doing things that are slightly innovative. It's allowed us to take a different approach. I kind of call it, it put everybody back into 7th grade science. There's a hypothesis. Let's test it. Let's learn. Let's be students of our people instead of assuming that we actually know everybody. To your point, Chris, it's like you've got 2 kids. What actually is better for you and your family as far as being connected to the Word of God in this season? It used to be, hey, you have to show up here. But now it's like, actually, you know what? The best opportunity you guys have is when the kids are at bed, going to bed, and this is a part of your Friday night date night. Like, you're going to invest in your spouse by watching church at Friday night at 9 o'clock when the kids are in bed. That's a beautiful thing. Relative to, nope, you got to be there Sunday at 9 o'clock. Otherwise, sorry.
Yeah, man, you mentioned something, and as we go to the next slide, I want to just take a note here, Matt, to make sure that we come back to this later. But I think you were describing a picture of like, hey, it's possible for a church to know an online profile of their audience, and I want to make sure that you get that in your head as like, hey, we can have a profile, and do you know who that profile is? Not only for your core members and people, which you probably know, but what about online? And what about those that are out even in the community?
Yeah, there's we can touch on it in a little bit, but the ability for us to understand and pastor our people, before I chase this rabbit too far, the word picture I like to give is sort of like the Wizard of Oz and walking down the yellow brick road, right? You've got Dorothy's, you've got the Tin Man, you've got the lion. Well, yes, they're all walking down the yellow brick road, but the motivation behind Dorothy for walking down the yellow brick road was very different than the lion. And this new reality and these capabilities, what I call capabilities, Resi, Gloo, all these other things, these dynamics allow us to pastor the Dorothys relative to the lions, but it means that we actually have to acknowledge that we don't yet know everything about them. Therefore, we have to be students of them. We've got to actually get back to what we are good at, which is let's understand our people, like Nehemiah 1:1-4. Tell me about the people, and then tell me about the city, and let me lean into the gap. And all we're doing is saying that there's an analog and a digital version of that. You guys want to jump to the next question?
Yeah, that's great. And so as we look at the second one, the second assessment question we asked was, how would you like to see your online stream improve? And I think at 87%, we talked about more engagement being the highest. The second, 19%, was better resiliency. But I think the more engagement, we're probably going to tie into that a little bit more here in a second, as that will be a topic that Matt will lean into. But Matt, anything just off of that, or would you like me to move to the next one on this?
Yeah, I mean, clearly from the technical end, I'm not the technical guy, but I think from that technical end, you guys have some of those stats about reliability and buffering and some of that. So to me, we do need to ensure that we're solving for that basic functional level. And then we can talk about engagement and other things, but there has to be a decency of experience from that perspective. So you're making trade-offs when you start to decide, what platforms we would leverage to stream content from that regard. So yeah, the engagement piece is clearly a juggernaut, but I always like to say, before you have engagement, you've got to have a reliable solution underneath it that allows for things to happen.
Yeah, that's great. If we can move to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about that reliability as well in context of this, Matt. But I think I want to stay resonate well with the engagement piece we'll dive into a little bit more. So the next question we asked was, when it comes to watching online church services, what is the biggest challenge your church experiences? And so we see this engagement word come up again at 48%, struggling with overall engagement, and people are disengaging from worshiping and singing as the second. We won't dive too much into the technical until we get to that our side, but just Matt, anything that comes to mind just looking at that?
Yeah. So a couple things too. Again, knowing your audience here is again using the example of the yellow brick road, right? Who's disengaged, who is not engaged from your church's perspective requires you to ask the question. It requires you to know a little bit more about them. So there is an element here where I'm like, yeah, 48% on this particular one are struggling with overall engagement. The other one was the 87%. What we're doing with some of the innovative churches and like sort of rethinking and recalibrating against that is this idea of, well, is it the youngest generation that is not quote unquote engaged? And then why are you counting? What does engaged mean? And how would you count that? Is it a 3-second view on Facebook that equals like some sort of magic gold star that you win? Or is it consuming an hour and 35 minutes of content on your page that's the thing that counts? Like, so I like to say, from Drucker, he used to say all the time, measure what matters. It's like, there is an element here of like, so we don't really measure engagement in the four walls of the building unless you're like scanning the horizon saying, oh, 85% of the congregation nodded their head, so it must have been a good point. There's like a foundational layer that I'm sitting here going like, what does engaged mean? I think that there's an element of like, we're trying to measure the four walls of the building in a digital context, butts, budgets, baptisms, and buildings. And I'm like, I don't really know if that equals the thing that we're actually after. So that there is some of that element here where I think we should actually probably start understanding what who is behind the scenes on the screen door or in person, and then functionally what do we mean by engaged? And I think that there might be a misunderstanding from an engagement perspective that's like participation. It's like, the churches that are really kind of starting to lean forward in this, we've kind of unearthed that there's what we call the church engagement framework. And so there are core functions every church on the planet is trying to do. And like 5 staves of a water barrel, it's not the best thing that you do that determines the impact of your local church, but it's the least, right? So the 5 core jobs that we've begun to understand, and now churches have started to adopt this engagement framework, is I'll define these for you. So attract, get, keep, grow, multiply. And like I said, like 5 staves of a water barrel, it's not the best thing that you do that determines impact, but it's the least. So if you can attract and get people, but you can't keep them or grow them, odds are you're spinning through people a lot. If you grow people but you can't attract people, you're probably a generation away from dying. So, and I've been blessed with the spiritual gift of sarcasm, so just bear with me on that. But the idea from this perspective really comes down to attract is, does the persona in the community that you're trying to reach know you exist? And usually the pushback is, oh, no, Matt, we're a church for everybody. Yeah, maybe. But what we've seen is actually know that there are distinct personas that your church hits relative to the church down the street. And attract is all functionally about ensuring that the persona knows you exist. Now, get is, can you get functionally that persona to show up one time? Keep, are they staying? Are they staying connected to the church? Most people don't know this, but the research that we've been doing has found that if you can get a person to be identified at your church 3 times, they'll retain on their own at right around 68 to 70%. Well, in church world, what we typically do is we say, hey, if you're new here, fill out a connect card. But what we probably should be asking is, hey, if you're a returning guest, we'd love to get to know you. And so the idea would be maximize visit 2, because visit 3, they're already planning on, based upon the data, based upon the research, to stay. Then grow is, are they actually growing? And the scorecard here is not activity based. Yes, we grow in the context of relationship. Yes, we like people in community. But the functional thing is am I doing an activity like being in a small group, but it's not actually increasing my relational formation with my spouse, or my spiritual formation with the development of my relationship with Christ? So the scorecard here under Grow that I'm starting to see, again, knowing your people, is around this idea of the 5 dimensions of human flourishing: spiritual formation, vocation, financial, relationship, mental and behavioral health. That's the new scorecard for Grow. It's functionally, are our people actually moving sort of up and to the right around those dimensions, not necessarily anchoring to an activity that we did. Hey, we're doing an alpha class. Great. Did that have an outcome associated with it? And I love what one of the churches that we work with up in Michigan, they've been on the front end of this. They love to make sure that they couple story with qualitative data, qualitative and quantitative data stitched together. So they hold themselves accountable to not allowing what they call some guy syndrome or some gal syndrome, where we do a service, we do an event, we have one person show up and say, this radically changed everything. Great. I don't want to diminish the story. But if we apply that one story across thousands of people or hundreds of people, and somehow assume that was the exact same feeling across the board, we're actually not stewarding and pastoring our people like they want to be. And then multiply is literally the flipping of consumer, I'm listening and I'm consuming, to what I call contributor. They're actually moving to the fulfillment of the relation, they're looking to live out the mission, vision, and passion of that local church. And that's a different motion. So when we talk about engagement, the framework that we operate within is, hey, does the persona know we exist? And then the what capability, again, this is what capability am I hiring to actually ensure that the persona knows? What capability? In this instance, Resi, I can hire Resi as a platform that allows me to understand that we are solving for get. We are getting new people to get connected digitally in this online experience. That's an easy solution to hire. We talk about capabilities and hiring things. You hire children's curriculum to do one of these core jobs. My question to churches, I'm sitting in a church right now in Tennessee, my question to churches all the time is it working? Are we measuring outcomes, or are we measuring activities? Because most of the time we're measuring activities, assuming an outcome. So that's kind of the big juggernaut, is measuring the things that actually, what I like to say, we measure movements, not moments. But typically churches are historically measuring the moment in that fashion. And that's just not what we're seeing now, especially going into like this Christmas season, guys. One of the shifts that I'm seeing right now is sort of this class of 2020 Christmas. They're going to engage differently, and they're going to progress. They're going to move through the church differently than probably the people that join you on Easter, regardless of what you communicate from the stage. It's unique, but we're starting to see these patterns. And I love patterns, because the entire Old Testament, they knew prophecy based upon pattern recognition. So if we can begin to understand the pattern, we can actually pastor to the pattern, knowing that the outcome of the pattern was what we actually were shooting for. So anyway, a little bit of a tangent here, Rick and Chris, but that's the core framework from an engagement perspective that the churches are actually doing. And from that, now I can actually start bringing the right capability underneath each core job.
Great stuff, Matt. So earlier we kind of touched on profiles. What capabilities can help me as a church pastor to better know my audience or my people? Like, talk to us a little bit about a profile and what you've done with that piece of your expertise.
Yeah. So at a base level, right? We're talking about online. We're talking about knowing your audience online. So I'm assuming that the people that are listening have a web page. Well, if you have a web page, chances are you have something called Google Analytics. Now, does the executive pastor, the leadership team, blah blah blah, need to know every analytic of Google Analytics? No. But there are probably a couple of core elements that you would want to bring forward to ensure, again, profiles help me know attract. They help me solve for attract. They help me solve for get. So in this instance, this example, Google Analytics could help me solve for attract and get. Gloo has a pixel that we're beginning to actually look at profiles of people that are hitting your web page saying, wow, did you know that the average age of people that are hitting your web page are, Gen X and boomers? They're not the Gen Zs. Well, what would that do to shift that? Or we find that the majority of people don't have children that are hitting your webpage, but yet we've elevated family ministry like right out the gate up front. It's kind of like, again, coming back to Wizard of Oz, allow us to begin to pastor against the persona, the person, versus treating everybody, I like to say spray and pray everybody. It's like, I think that gets you a certain distance, but could we be better pastors and stewards of our flock? Like Proverbs says, know the condition of your flock. And that means actually knowing them. Jesus left the 99 for the one in that example because he knew the one was gone. Most of the time we're like, oh no, we're good. So those are some of the elements, like from a profile perspective, that would allow us to actually shape our ministries to be more applicable in that construct.
Great thoughts here, Matt. Earlier in the day, I was having a conversation about just phones, and the average person is spending, over 3 hours a day on their phone. And we just moved to Atlanta, and one of the first things I did was go out and just do a search for, hey, churches in my area, and trying to find things like, hey, how close is the church to me? I'm looking at ratings on Google as far as stars go. I'm looking at comments. Obviously, I know a few churches in the area like North Point. But that was my first step, right? And being able to engage, not just like in an online live setting, but having tools like your website, having your Google profiles up to date, your Facebook page. Talk a little bit about that as far as the capabilities to help churches be known in their community.
That's right. I mean, the thing I love about it is because you're talking about it from the community member perspective, right? But you're probably surrounded by, I'm going to make it up, 100 churches within 10 miles of where you're at, because it's Atlanta. So the idea would be, right, like how do we make sure that the right church knows that that the right church exists in your area? And again, there's going to be a variety of different resources. Gloo has some free resources there. I mean, again, I don't even know if they print them anymore, but find the white pages, for crying out loud. Like there are ways in which we could actually begin to understand the density of churches and the most applicable churches into the construct of serving you, Chris, in Atlanta with your wife and kids. These are low bars of entry, but it's like, what does Facebook say? Most churches have a Facebook page. Like, we could start to begin to understand and look for, the quote unquote, I like to say, sort of the Yelp of churches, and figure out the most. Again, I like to look at ratings because I think that there's just the constant, 100,000 strangers voices versus me telling, you to trust this 123, Lutheran church down the street. It's like, well, if 100,000 people told me that they liked it, I might like it too, based upon that. So that, again, there's not a lot of rocket science around it. The biggest issue that I think we have in church world is we're not leveraging capabilities to make sure that that they exist and that it's a good fit, because we are choosing to sort of, again, treat everybody the same instead of understanding that you have two kids. You might be looking for both relationship with your spouse, Genesis 2, right? Prioritize husband to wife, not parent to child. So we have to acknowledge that maybe you're looking for relationship stuff with you and your spouse, knowing that you've injected 2 kids into the family structure. So maybe that's a different church than the one that's closest to you, right? There, that's the shifting that we're seeing, is how do we begin to pastor against the persona of the people that we're trying to reach, knowing that we're probably not everything to everybody. I just don't think that that was the structure.
So, Matt, we started off with kind of the disruption of 2020, and we flipped it to like, hey, there's good coming out of this with tools and things that we're learning. From your seat and working with some of the most strategic churches in the world, like, what do you see, or what are you looking forward to in 2021? And just share with us a little bit about what excites you about um, just what you're seeing and what's happening in the world of Matt Engel and these lighthouse churches that you work with.
Yeah, so I won't go too far into this, but for a long time I've been asked to give a talk that I gave a long time ago, back actually when the financial crisis hit, and you started seeing these platform technologies begin to emerge, and I called it the Uberization of ministry. And most people that hear that are like, oh my gosh, we've got to have an app. Like that's what Engel means when we talk about that. And it's like, no. Really, what you have to acknowledge now that is shifting, that I'm excited about, is the origination point of where trust is happening has shifted from these big pipeline theories, like big brands, big personas, like the ambiance of big buildings, and that somehow equates to like they must be killing it because they have a big building or they've got 25 buildings, right? To back to the original point of 100,000 strangers telling me it's okay to actually show up to that church, and it's gonna be a welcomed place for me. So trust is shifted to this distributed model. And what I'm seeing right now, the future forward, thanks to COVID, the theory behind the Uberization of ministry actually happened. And so that functional thing, what I'm seeing, which is super exciting, is churches are beginning to create tools that actually allow me, Matt Engel, to be the church in the construct. That's what again, most pastors, when COVID first hit that following weekend, what did they preach? Remember, the people are the church, not the building. Yet we're stuck in this mental model that's like, no, you have to come back to the building in order to be pastored. It's like, do you? Because I think we could actually provide tools for people to help people grow. And that's actually the church. And so I'm seeing this massive energy and movement toward how do we equip the saint to actually do the ministry. And it's really been refreshing from my perspective, and what I've seen these other churches begin to embrace, what I call this platform theory around that one single construct. How do we enable, or that's not the church term, all the counselors just got upset because I said enable, equip. How do we as the church help equip the saint to do the work of the ministry? And we as the staff members on staff are not the saint, we're the organization. And our job is to help equip the saint to do the ministry. So that, like, in a short version, is what I'm super pumped about. And that is a byproduct of COVID. It forced our hand to actually acknowledge that's what the Bible has always spoken. People help people grow. Buildings, yes, relevant. Corporate worship, not diminishing that one bit. But the idea that the building grows people, no, people grow people. That's why I like the church engagement framework when we talk about relationship catalyzes growth. If content alone was sufficient, everybody would be fine because we have 2,000 years worth of history and content.
Great stuff, Matt. And I have a feeling this is one of many conversations with you and the Resi team. And so, as we take a couple steps, going forward with today's discussion, I think Nate had some things to share, and we've got some pretty exciting tools for you listeners here today as well. Nate?
Yeah, so we'll just take it for a minute. Thank you, Matt and Chris. Really valuable insights today, and I think that'll help a lot of people. And as we continue to go along, we're watching in the chat too, so we'd love to take some time just for Q&A at the end. So any questions or anything that you guys have discussion on, please put those in the chat. But just to talk a little bit about Resi for a minute, we all likely are here today because we have an online audience, and we're trying to figure out how to reach them better. And so the reality is we probably don't just know that we need to stream. We are streaming, or we have an online audience that we're trying to reach right now. Here at Resi, we actually started out of a church because of the frustrations that we had with streaming. We had a lot of issues where we would have random internet packet loss, and we would lose half of our viewers. The stats actually show you lose about 20%, actually about 30% of your audience after one buffering whale, almost 70% after the second one. And so we said, we know we need to do something different. Nobody likes buffering. We know that. And what we built was an entirely new way of streaming that we call the Resilient Streaming Protocol, or RSP. And so how RSP works, instead of sending the content directly to the cloud, it actually caches it. It saves it locally and then sends it to the cloud on a short delay, verifies it, makes sure that it's perfect before sending to the cloud. So, and that means that what the viewer sees is no different than a Netflix video. So no buffering glitches or lost data because of packet loss to the broadcast site, which is great. And then it also means that we can take that, we can send that to multiple destinations: Facebook, YouTube, mobile apps, and church online platform. And actually, I just want to take a moment here too, out of the Resi pitch, and even just bring in Matt and Chris and Rick with this too, and just talk a little bit about platforms and talk about streaming to multiple destinations, because I know that's really important. So what's the importance of reaching people where they're at?
Yeah, this to me was an interesting sort of observation that kind of emerged here over the last, I'd say really intentionally. We started measuring it about 4 months ago. Again, COVID hit, we kind of all reacted, right? And we started to see some cool innovations about how we can bring, you don't preach to a couch, right? Like you talk to people when you're in their living room versus preaching to people when they're in the building. And so the cool thing that I've seen emerge out of this from a multiple platforms perspective is like watch times. This has actually allowed us to steward the various platforms differently based upon the platform of where the people are choosing to consume the content that you're providing, right? Like we shouldn't necessarily force compliance on people that says the only way you can hear us is if you show up to this particular screen door. That's the equivalent of saying you have to show up to the four walls of the building for us to talk to you, for us to pastor you. So the idea would be like, what segment of people are leveraging Facebook to consume your resource versus Roku versus YouTube versus your online platform versus your app, and they're airplaying it, right? And once we begin to know that, it allows us to actually steward our connectivity to them. And so the example here that we just kind of bumped into recently, then we started testing it, and sure enough, it's actually been working, was like, hey, if they're on Facebook, they're consuming about 8 minutes before they bounce off your content. What if we sort of reshuffled the deck and allowed for that 8 minutes to be the right 8 minutes that person needs to hear, versus nope, it took me 10 minutes to build up to the key point. And so they were 2 minutes, that if they would have stuck around 2 minutes longer, they would have got the key point and they would have got the Bible verse. So the idea here that we're starting to see really emerge is actually acknowledging the pattern of which people are consuming and make sure that they're getting the relevancy that they need, versus a compliant way of saying, no, you must follow the rule that it's an hour long in order for us to know that you somehow got the word of God. It's like, I mean, from a YouTube and a platform perspective, one of the other things we're seeing is like one of the key points was people are disengaging. I can't remember the stat. They're disengaging from worship and singing. One, how do we know that? Probably by scrubbing. They're on YouTube or a platform. They're probably passing through all the worship to get to the message. One of the things that we're seeing happen then is actually moving the core content, the preaching, to the front end, and then allowing for the announcements and the music to fit on the back end. Like, allow them to get what they're looking for, period, because it's a good thing. It's what they are actually looking for. then what we're seeing from this core construct of singing and worship and all that, we used to pass out cassette tapes in church, and then we went to CDs, and we never really replaced that tool. Well, what I'm seeing churches do now is actually creating devotionals where they're sending the music in a devotional daily. So, hey, here's the song for today, here's the song for tomorrow. Especially during Advent, it's pretty cool to see churches actually putting out Christmas worship by email and saying, hey, here's our core contents, 45, 50 minutes of preaching. And if you want the music, just register here for our daily music devotional thing. It's pretty cool to see from just that technological perspective how we're starting to adapt based upon the platforms in which the people are actually using.
Man, I love this. And, to bring a personal touch to it, like this is, I don't know, we share this, but this is year 13 for me, by God's grace, with no drugs and no alcohol. And I remember back to that day, it was an email that I opened, and then I got invited to a church, and then I got followed up by a volunteer. And I didn't know at that moment that God was going to use that one touch, that one piece of technology to get me invited to change my life, really. And the second story is we had a marriage ministry my wife and I were a part of that started back in January. We went to Zoom in March, and from March to July, we had Zoom meetings every Thursday from 6:30 to 8. And in the survey that one of the guys filled out, he had said that he had accepted Christ. He had found a new faith through the Zoom meeting, guys, right? And so if God can use an email and help start me on a new journey, and God can use a Zoom meeting, much like what we're doing here today, even with the difficulties, and God can provide and give churches these amazing tools like Resi. Imagine what life transformation is possible, and what we're going to see over the coming years and months as more people can get access to some of these tools and resources and messages. It's so encouraging and so good. I love that we're talking about this here today. It's so important.
Yeah, again, Yellow Brick Road, right? Like, what platform does Dorothy prefer, and can we meet them where they're at relative to the lions that are in the church? And if we can begin to understand that, it allows us to actually be equipping people to actually be the church. And so yeah, Chris, to your point, they used email to get to you, but email doesn't apply to everybody. We're seeing actually that if you want to talk to millennials, QR codes is the way to go. If you want to talk to Gen Xers, texting is the way to go. If you want to talk to boomers, email is the way to go. Like, they're in the same aspect of platforms. Those are different capabilities we can hire to meet people where they're at.
Love it.
Back to you, buddy. I'm super pumped about that thing.
Yeah, that's really good. It's really awesome to see, just like you guys were saying, if there's one thing that's came out of 2020, it's how to be creative with what we have and how to reach people where they are. And we had a blog post actually that we wrote recently about a church in New York too, that realized that contextually what they've been doing for however many years was not translating to online. So they shifted that around for their Facebook audience, and they put one thing on Facebook, they put one thing on YouTube, they put one thing on their online audience or on their website, and they found that they had so much better results from that when they actually opened up their building again, they decided to continue in the ways and the paradigm that they had done with the content in the specific different ways. So really cool to see how people have been able to do that. So as far as Resi goes, we'd love to meet with anybody who would be wanting to talk about streaming with their church, talk about how they can stream better, reach their audience better, and reach their audience more reliably. So there's actually two ways that you can get going with Resi. We have our hardware encoders, which we've had for since we started. That's what we originally our original product, and then actually this past month we released a new way of streaming from within ProPresenter, which is really awesome. So that doesn't require any hardware. There's no upfront cost to get going. So really easy ways to get going, ways that have never been really any easier. So and then we all know that you're here for audience data, and Resi obviously provides that. we're able to see where your viewers are watching from, how long they're watching for, how well they're engaging. What's really been awesome about that is we've been able to track actually viewer statistics as they've gone to the stream. And as they've moved from other platforms, we've been able to see numbers like 90% less streaming complaints. Obviously, that one is not measured through our platform. That's just what we've had in discussion. But a lot less viewer complaints, 150% longer watch times. And that obviously contributes to a larger audience over time with more people attending, more people giving, more people coming to Christ in their living rooms, which is obviously what we want. So love to show you a demo. Resi.io/demo is a great way to do that. As far as analytics go, too, I was going to mention we are also really excited about some upcoming things with our analytics, both with aggregating data from like things like Facebook and YouTube. And so you'll be hearing more about that from us coming soon. But on top of that, we're really excited to partner with Gloo as a resource for churches to really understand their audience, not just from a holistic perspective, but to really individually know their attendees, to know what they're dealing with, where they are in life, and what to do with that in the same way that you would in a physical church. So I'll pass it back off to Chris to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is my 10th year of working with churches, and what I'm just grateful for with the Gloo platform is that we actually have something for you with some free tools, right? And so if you participated in the Resi assessment, that was actually one of our assessments that are free for you to be able to give your people to get a pulse on how they're thinking about digital church and what they like, what they don't like, and help you as a leader to better understand and to better know your audience, right? So use those assessments, get access to that information, maybe try it out on your staff and your groups. And, at our church, we tested it with the Facebook, and they were so blown away by the results. They moved to men and women's ministries. And so lots of different ways to use those tools, but there's a whole library of free assessments powered by Barna, some of them by some of our other friends out in the space. We also have, if you go to the next slide, Know Your Community. This is a report that is fantastic. And this Know Your Community report is going to allow you to get some insights on what's going on in your area. This is a free report. It'll highlight things like faith scores, family dynamics, whether or not your community's struggling with marriages in need, basic finance demographics, and even opiate dependency risk. This is a free report. It's about 10 to 15 pages, depending on where you're at. And you can share this. You can talk about this in your staff meeting and learn a little bit about what's going on in your community.
Hey, Chris, real quick, just as we were talking through that, I think it's, again, anchoring in the church engagement framework can actually help churches begin to understand, where would I use an assessment, and why would I pull in an assessment? Well, you might pull in an assessment when it comes to trying to understand how to keep people, or are my people growing, right? And I might use my Know My Community report on like the attract and the get, because I can get what I like to say is the entire visibility of the iceberg, versus most of the time pastors look at the top of the waterline of the iceberg, but the bulk is underneath it. And so the insights report, the Know Your Community report, can help you understand who in your community from that whole iceberg perspective on attract and get. Then I might pull in a free assessment for keep or grow. And now I'm starting to stitch all of the data together, right? Like I've got Resi data that they're aggregating, that they're pulling forward. I've got profile data from Gloo. I've got further refinements of assessments of how my people are doing and are they growing. And the thing that I like about our use of capabilities like this is we really haven't allowed our people to really contribute into the ministry, because it was always like, well, I've got the idea. So, and the Lord only spoke to me, so therefore we're going to go do this thing. And what I'm seeing that's shifting, that's really fascinating and really exciting, is that I'm seeing churches that are having their congregants contribute value into it, creating feedback loops that allow for them to know that, yes, we are moving the needles on the outcomes associated with the activity. So I share that just as we were talking through those capabilities, that's how churches can start to put them underneath the right particular job to be done.
I love that, Matt Engel. And as we go to the next slide, we are sharing one of our premium, just kind of a glimpse of it for you guys to explore. But talk a little bit about Insights Plus, Matt, and the ability to go even deeper into insights in a community and within a pastor's church.
Yeah, one of the things that's really kind of unique is like, how are your people motivated? And what if you actually used a couple of different phrases or words that reached 70% of your people versus like 10% of your people? And I say this lovingly, but it's like some of your people in your church need to hear we all fall short of the glory of God, and other people need to hear we all suck at something. That's just a matter of fact. What if we acknowledged those two realities and reached 80% of our people versus only the sliver, because that's what I wanted to say and that's what I felt that was what they needed. So we're seeing this great opportunity to, again, accelerate our pastoring of people by just communicating the way in which the Lord designed them to receive a message and see the image. It's like if he knows every hair on our head, he probably knows how we probably want to be communicated with versus how we should spray and pray everybody. This is typically what we do. Again, love people. I believe in Jesus, communion of saints, forgiveness of sins. I just like the sarcasm.
Right on. So, I mean, all kinds of free stuff. I think, Nate, you're going to get them some information on how to get access to some of these tools. Create a free Gloo account, get access to the Know Your Community report, the assessment library, and learn about some of the premium apps, if you will, that we have on the Gloo platform. Really appreciate allowing us to hang out today. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks Chris and Matt and Rick. It's been a really awesome time, and we're definitely going to be planning to do more of these get-togethers, just on a really valuable topic and really good information. So thank you all for joining us, and thanks to everybody for watching. Really appreciate you taking the time today.